Eritrean Refugee Crisis by Ponette Moore and Allison Chen. The Eritrean refugee crisis is one of the least known refugee crises in the world, but there have been as many as 1 million Eritrean refugees since the late 1990s. Every month, over 4,000 Eritrean refugees migrate from Eritrea. Eritrea is located in Africa, specifically in the Horn of Africa. Eritrea has an extensive coastline along the Red Sea and is bordered by Sudan in the west and Ethiopia in the south. A history of conflict and oppression and a difficult geographic location have contributed to the refugee crisis in Eritrea. The oppressive government policies are the push factors for the refugees. The most important push factor is forced conscription into the army for an indefinite period of time. The next push factor is forced conscription into labor projects, also for an indefinite period of time. Another push factor is arbitrary arrest and detention of Eritrean citizens, the widespread use of torture, and finally, religious persecution. The demographic composition of the Eritrean refugees is mainly single men, many of whom were conscripted into the Eritrean military. Many of these men are a part of the Tigrinya ethnic group. They come from large cities, are more educated, affluent, and are Christian. The refugees mainly go to Sudan and Ethiopia. If they're lucky, they can migrate to Europe or Israel. Lesser numbers go south to Kenya or east to the Gulf states. They usually travel by foot, car, or boat. One tragic consequence of the Eritrean refugee crisis occurred in October 2013. An overloaded boat sank off the Italian island of Lampedusa, and over 300 refugees drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. The current political situation in Eritrea is dominated by only one man, Isaias Afwerki. He is a dictator that heads up a one-party government called the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, or the PFDJ. This one man, one-party rule stops change and creates mass dissatisfaction and is likely to continue in the future. This government was formed in 1993 and was intended to be a transitional government, but it never was. The last vote was held in 1993, and Afwerki got 95% of the vote. Afwerki's cabinet exercised executive authority, and all of the cabinet members are appointed by Afwerki. A constitution was ratified in 1997, but was never entered into effect. The government's actions have serious political implications for the lives of these refugees. The exodus of the refugees increases dissatisfaction with the government, which leads to the government continuing to crack down on the population and continuing their existing policies. According to Amnesty International, there are over 10,000 political prisoners in Eritrean jails. If a refugee returns to Eritrea, the government will subject them to torture and isolation in prison. Because of fear of punishment, the best and brightest Eritrean refugees will never return. This results in brain drain for Eritrea.
The Eritrean refugee crisis also impacts surrounding countries. Eritrean refugees tax the host country's resources, often leading to conflict and resentment between the host countries and the refugees. They often live in slums or in overcrowded camps set up in the host country. Many of the refugees live in tiny metal domes called rondas. Refugees compete for water and other scarce supplies, share services, compete for employment, contribute to environmental degradation, and foster disease due to unsanitary conditions found in their camps. Eritrean refugees are often looked upon with suspicion and treated with hostility. Vulnerable refugees are often exploited by the criminal elements like human traffickers. The border countries of Ethiopia and Sudan experience some levels of destabilization due to the influx of these refugees. One international implication caused by the government is the punishment by the United Nations by sanctioning Eritrea for their human rights violation. Another consequence of the Eritrean and other African refugee crises is that they have impacted how European countries look at their immigration policies. This decade-long crisis cries out for a solution. We propose these solutions to end this tragic Eritrea humanitarian crisis. Get rid of conscription laws. Change the government policies that violate human rights, including eliminating torture, religious persecution, and freedom of speech. Allow freedom to vote in a new government and set up a limit to how long a president can serve. Get rid of the dictator.